I was in chemistry class when the Bunsen burner exploded. The flame shot up 3 feet and singed my eyebrows, but that wasn't the scary part. The scary part was watching Mr. Garrett's face light up with this twisted smile as everyone screamed. "Everyone calm down," he said, but his voice had this excited edge to it. "It's just a little fire." My lab partner Emma was backing away from our station, but the flames were spreading to the papers we'd left on the counter. I reached for the fire extinguisher mounted on the wall, but Mr. Garrett's hand slammed down on my wrist with surprising force. "Don't touch that," he hissed, his grip tightening until I could feel my pulse throbbing against his fingers. "This is a learning opportunity." The regular teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had been out for 3 weeks with pneumonia. Mr. Garrett was our long-term substitute, and from day one, something felt off about him. He'd stare too long at certain students, especially the girls. His eyes would follow Jessica when she walked to the supply cabinet, and he'd watch Madison bend over her lab notebook with this creepy intensity that made my skin crawl. He'd make these weird comments about how soft our generation was, and how we needed to experience real danger to toughen up. During our first week with him, he told us stories about his childhood in rural Montana, where apparently kids regularly handled dangerous chemicals without supervision, and learned respect through pain. Back in my day, he'd say at least 3 times per class, we didn't have all these safety regulations. We learned by doing. And if you got hurt, well, that was just part of the education process. But this was different. The fire was spreading across our lab table now, eating through Emma's carefully organized notes and my lab report that was due next period. The flames were already reaching toward the ceiling, and he was just standing there watching like it was the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen. "Mr. Garrett, we need to put it out," shouted Jake from the back of the room, his voice cracking with panic. "No, we need to observe," Mr. Garrett said, pulling out his phone and starting to record. His hands were steady, professional, like he'd done this before. "Document everything. How does the fire behave? What's the color telling us about the temperature? This is real chemistry, not that textbook garbage." Emma was crying now because her notebook was burning, the one with all her college prep notes, her AP study guides, everything she'd worked on for months. She tried to reach across the flames to save what she could, but the heat drove her back. I tried again to reach for the extinguisher, stretching my free arm toward it, while Mr. Garrett still held my other wrist in his iron grip. But he grabbed both my arms and yanked them behind my back with enough force to make my shoulders scream. "Let go of me," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Several classmates turned to look at us, their faces showing confusion and growing alarm. "Sit down and observe," he said, his grip tightening until I could feel his fingernails digging through my shirt. "This is real chemistry, not that sanitized textbook garbage. You're witnessing combustion in its purest form." The smoke alarm should have gone off by now, but nothing happened. The silence where that piercing beep should have been was somehow more terrifying than the growing fire. Later we found out he disabled it during his prep period, claiming it was too sensitive and kept going off for no reason. He'd also disconnected the automatic notification system that was supposed to alert the main office when any classroom alarm was triggered. Tyler stood up at his station, knocking over his stool in his haste. "This is insane. I'm getting help." "Sit down or you fail," Mr. Garrett snapped, finally releasing my arms but moving to block Tyler's path to the door. "Everyone sits down and takes notes on what they observe. This is a once-in-a-lifetime educational opportunity." But Tyler was already pushing past him, reaching for the door handle and yanking on it with all his strength. It didn't budge. He tried again, putting his shoulder into it, but the door stayed firmly shut. "It's locked," Tyler said, his voice rising with panic. "The door is locked from the inside." Mr. Garrett smiled that same sick smile, pulling a key ring from his pocket and jangling it in front of us. "Safety protocol. No one leaves during an active experiment. We wouldn't want anyone to miss the educational value of what's happening here." That's when I realized we were trapped with a lunatic who was using our fear as some kind of twisted science lesson. The fire was getting bigger, spreading from our lab table to the one next to it, and smoke was starting to fill the room. "This is educational?" Emma choked out through her tears. "You're gonna get us all killed." "Death is just another part of the learning process," Garrett replied calmly, still filming with his phone, though I prefer to think of it as natural selection in action. The fire had jumped to Madison Station now, and she was frantically trying to move her stuff away from the flames. Her textbooks, her lab notebook, her purse, everything was in danger. The smoke was getting thicker by the minute, and kids were starting to cough. Some were crying openly now. The acrid smell of burning plastic and paper filled the room, making my eyes water and my throat burn. "This isn't normal," Emma whispered to me, clutching my arm. "Teachers don't do this. This isn't how experiments work." Mr. Garrett's head snapped toward us, his hearing apparently sharper than we'd realized. "What's not normal is how weak you all are. When I was your age, we learned through experience, not coddling. My chemistry teacher once had us make gunpowder from scratch. 3 kids got burns, but we all learned respect for explosive reactions. He walked over to the supply cabinet with deliberate, measured steps, like he was savoring the moment. From inside, he pulled out a large bottle of isopropyl alcohol, the 99% pure kind that Mrs. Rodriguez always warned us was extremely flammable. My stomach dropped as I watched him unscrew the cap with theatrical slowness. "Let's see what happens when we add an accelerant to our little experiment," he said, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "No!" The whole class screamed at once, but he just smiled wider. "This is science," he said. "Hypothesis, experiment, observation. What do you think will happen when I add this?" He tilted the bottle, and the clear liquid splashed across the burning lab tables. The flames roared higher, spreading faster across the surfaces. The heat hit my face like opening an oven door, and I could smell the hair on my arms starting to singe. That's when Sarah started having an asthma attack. She was gasping for air in the increasingly smoky room, fumbling desperately for her inhaler in her backpack with shaking hands. "I can't breathe," she wheezed, her face already turning pale. Mr. Garrett looked at her with obvious annoyance, like she was interrupting his show. "Then breathe through your nose. Problem solved. In and out. It's not complicated." "She has asthma," I shouted over the crackling of the flames. "She needs her inhaler." "What she needs is to learn to control her breathing," he replied, turning back to watch the flames with fascination. "Panic makes everything worse. This is an excellent opportunity for her to practice breath control under stress." Sarah was turning pale now, her lips getting that bluish tint I'd seen when her asthma got really bad in middle school. I remembered the time in 8th grade when she'd had to be rushed to the hospital during a fire drill because someone had been burning leaves nearby and the smoke triggered a severe attack. Emma and I helped Sarah sit down on the floor, but the smoke was only getting worse. Black clouds were billowing across the ceiling, and visibility was dropping fast. "Please," Sarah gasped between shallow, desperate breaths. "I need to get out. I need fresh air." "No one leaves until the experiment is complete," Mr. Garrett said firmly, pocketing his keys again. "We're going to observe this reaction until it reaches its natural conclusion." That's when Marcus lost it completely. He was a big guy, played linebacker on the varsity team, and he picked up his thick chemistry textbook and hurled it at the window with all his strength. It bounced off with a loud thud, leaving only a small crack in the reinforced glass. "Are you insane?" Marcus yelled, his face red with anger and panic. "She's going to die! We're all going to die!" Mr. Garrett calmly walked over to Marcus and got right in his face, standing close enough that Marcus had to look down to meet his eyes. "Control yourself, or I'll give you something real to worry about." The threat in his voice was unmistakable, and for the first time, I saw fear flicker across Marcus's face. This was a kid who'd never backed down from anyone, but something in Mr. Misbruck. Garrett's cold stare made him take a step back. I looked around the room at my classmates. 26 kids total, all of us trapped with smoke getting thicker by the minute, and a substitute teacher who seemed to be enjoying watching us panic. The fire was spreading to more lab tables now, and the temperature in the room was rising noticeably. Tyler had found a fire axe mounted in an emergency case near the door, but when he tried to break the glass, he discovered that case was locked too. Mr. Garrett had a second key on his lanyard for that, and he was clearly not planning to share it. "The fire's reaching the ceiling," Emma said, pointing up with a trembling finger. She was right. The flames were climbing the wall now, and black smoke was starting to pour across the ceiling tiles. Some were beginning to sag from the heat, and I could see that a few were already starting to discolor from the temperature. "Everyone get low," I called out, remembering something from a fire safety assembly we'd had last year. "Stay under the smoke. Crawl if you have to." We all crouched down or dropped to our knees, but Mr. Garrett remained standing upright, still filming everything with his phone. He was recording our fear, our panic, our desperate attempts to help each other. "Beautiful," he murmured, speaking more to himself than to us. "Look at those flame patterns. The convection currents are absolutely perfect. You can see how the heat is creating its own wind system, feeding more oxygen to the base of the fire." Madison crawled over to where Sarah was struggling to breathe, her inhaler clutched uselessly in her hand. She'd tried it twice, but the medication wasn't helping in the smoke-filled room. "Mr. Garrett, please," Madison begged, looking up at him from the floor. "Can you unlock the door? She really needs help. She needs clean air." Mr. Garrett looked down at them with an expression that was somehow both cold and fascinated. "What she needs is to learn that the world isn't going to coddle her disability. This is an excellent opportunity for her to develop coping mechanisms." That word, disability, hit wrong. The way he said it, like it was something shameful or fake, like Sarah was just being dramatic for attention. "It's not a disability," Madison snapped, her fear temporarily overridden by anger. "It's a medical condition, a serious one." "Same thing," he said with a dismissive wave. "Weakness that needs to be overcome through exposure. My nephew had asthma when he was young. You know what cured it? His parents stopped babying him and made him run laps until he learned to breathe properly. I felt a surge of rage so intense it almost overwhelmed my fear. He was talking about Sarah like she was some kind of laboratory experiment, not a person who was genuinely struggling to breathe. Like her suffering was entertaining to him. The smoke was getting so thick now that I could barely see across the room. Kids were coughing constantly, and tears were streaming down everyone's faces from the irritation. My eyes were burning, and every breath felt like I was inhaling sandpaper. That's when I noticed something that made my heart stop completely. The flames had reached the back corner of the room where Mrs. Rodriguez kept all the chemical storage. "Everyone get away from the back wall," I screamed, my voice cracking with terror. "The chemicals are stored back there." Mr. Garrett's head snapped toward me, his expression shifting from calm fascination to sharp interest. "How do you know what's stored back there?" "Because I helped Mrs. Rodriguez organize it last month," I said, backing away from that wall as fast as I could crawl. "There's methanol and acetone and hydrogen peroxide and all kinds of stuff that—" "Excellent," he interrupted, his eyes lighting up with genuine excitement. "Then you know this is about to become exponentially more interesting. We're about to witness some truly spectacular chemical reactions." He was excited about the possibility of an explosion. Actually, genuinely excited. Like Christmas morning excited. The realization hit me that he wasn't just negligent or crazy, he was actively looking forward to seeing us get hurt. Jake had been quietly working on something in the corner, while everyone else was focused on the fire and Sarah's breathing problems. He'd managed to break the lock on one of the windows using a lab clamp as a makeshift lever, prying and twisting until the metal gave way. Fresh air started flowing in through the narrow opening, which felt like a miracle on my burning lungs. But it also fed the fire, and the flames immediately roared higher and brighter. "Close that window immediately," Mr. Garrett ordered, striding toward Jake with obvious anger. "No," Jake said firmly, positioning himself between Mr. Garrett and the window. "People need air. Sarah needs air. What people need is to learn discipline and respect for authority," Mr. Garrett replied, his voice getting dangerous again. "Close the window now, or face the consequences." Jake squared his shoulders and looked Mr. Garrett straight in the eye. "What consequences? You're going to fail me for trying to save someone's life?" Mr. Garrett started walking toward Jake with deliberate, threatening steps. I could see the fury building in his face, and I was genuinely afraid of what he might do. But before he could reach Jake, there was a loud crack from above us, and a ceiling tile came crashing down, landing right where Mr. Garrett had been standing a second before. He looked up at the ceiling with something that might have been concern flickering across his face for the first time since this nightmare started. More tiles were sagging ominously, and I could see water stains spreading across them from the sprinkler system that he'd somehow disabled. "Maybe we should wrap this up," he said, but his voice was uncertain now, like he was finally realizing that his experiment might be getting out of his control. "Yeah, by unlocking the door and letting us out," Tyler shouted from across the room, where he'd been trying to break the window with a lab stool. But Mr. Garrett shook his head stubbornly. "We exit through proper channels. Everyone line up by the door in an orderly fashion, and we'll wait for the appropriate authorities." "What proper channels?" Emma demanded, her voice hoarse from the smoke. "You locked us in here? You're the one who started this fire." "I initiated a controlled demonstration," he corrected coldly. "What happened after that was due to student panic and poor decision-making." The flames were really roaring now, and I could feel intense heat on my back even from the middle of the room. Sarah was barely conscious at this point, her breathing so shallow and rapid that Madison was supporting most of her weight. "She's going to pass out," Madison said desperately. "Her lips are turning blue." That's when I smelled something that made my stomach drop completely. A sharp, sweet smell that definitely didn't belong in a chemistry classroom. It was getting stronger by the second. "Do you smell that?" I asked Emma, who was crouched next to me. She nodded, her face going pale. "What is it?" I racked my brain, trying to remember the chemical storage inventory that Mrs. Rodriguez had made me help organize. We'd spent hours cataloging everything, and she'd been very specific about which chemicals were the most dangerous. Then it hit me like a punch to the gut. "Benzene," I whispered. "One of the containers must have cracked from the heat." Emma's eyes went wide with terror. She knew as well as I did that benzene was not only highly flammable but also toxic. Even breathing the fumes could cause serious health problems. "We have to get out of here right now," she said, grabbing my arm. "If that benzene ignites..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. We both knew that an explosion was becoming more likely by the minute. But Mr. Garrett was fumbling with his keys now, his hands shaking as he tried to find the right one. For the first time, he looked genuinely nervous, but in a way that suggested he was more worried about getting in trouble than about our safety. "Which key is it?" Marcus yelled, his voice desperate. "I'm trying," Mr. Garrett snapped, but there was definitely panic creeping into his voice now too. "There are a lot of keys here." A second ceiling tile crashed down, this one much closer to the door where most of us were huddled. Sparks flew when it hit the floor, and several kids screamed. We were running out of time fast. Tyler had given up on breaking the window and instead grabbed the fire extinguisher from the wall, the same one Mr. Garrett had prevented me from using when this whole thing started. He pulled the pin and started spraying foam at the base of the flames, but it was like trying to stop a wildfire with a garden hose. That's not going to be enough. Jake called out from the window, where he'd managed to open it even wider. Some kids were already climbing out onto the fire escape, despite Mr. Garrett's orders. "Everyone out the window," I shouted. "Leave your stuff and get out now." But Mr. Garrett suddenly moved to block the path to the window, Duwat still clutching his ring of keys. "No one leaves without my permission," he said, but his authority was cracking along with his voice. "This is still my classroom, and you are still my students." Emma and I ignored him completely. We grabbed Sarah under her arms and started half carrying, half dragging her toward the window. She was dead weight at this point, barely breathing, her face an alarming shade of gray. "Stop right there," Mr. Garrett commanded, but his voice sounded hollow now. We kept moving. Jake helped pull Sarah through the window frame and onto the fire escape outside. Emma went next, then me, my hands shaking as I climbed through. As I was pulling my legs through the window frame, I looked back at Mr. Garrett one last time. He was still standing there with those keys in his hand, watching the fire consume his classroom, but the look on his face wasn't panic or fear. It was almost wistful, like he was genuinely sad to see his experiment coming to an end. "Come on," I called to him despite everything he'd done. "You need to get out too." He looked at me with those cold, empty eyes. "This was supposed to be a learning experience," he said quietly. "You were supposed to learn something important about life and survival." "We did learn something," I replied. "We learned that you're dangerous." The rest of the class made it out through the window or through the door, which Mr. Garrett finally managed to unlock in the last few seconds before the chemical storage area went up. The explosion shook the entire building, blowing out 3 windows and sending a fireball up toward the 3rd floor. The fire department arrived just as we were helping Sarah down the fire escape. She was unconscious by then, her breathing so labored that one of the firefighters immediately radioed for an ambulance. "What happened in there?" The fire chief asked me as paramedics worked on Sarah. "Our substitute teacher locked us in and started a fire," I said, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. The fire chief looked skeptical until he saw the security footage later. Sarah spent 3 days in the hospital with severe smoke inhalation and one of the worst asthma attacks she'd ever had. The doctor told her parents that if we'd been trapped in that room for even 5 more minutes, she probably would have died. Mr. Garrett was arrested that same day and charged with endangering minors, arson, false imprisonment, and assault. During the booking process, they found a notebook in his car filled with detailed plans for educational crisis scenarios and sketches of various ways to trap students in classrooms. Turns out this wasn't his first incident. He'd been fired from 3 other schools in different states for similar behavior, but somehow our district had never done a proper background check. They'd hired him based on a fake reference letter that he'd apparently written himself. During the investigation, we learned that he'd spent weeks preparing for this particular lesson. He not only disabled the smoke detectors and sprinkler system, but also jammed the classroom door locks and removed the emergency phone that was supposed to connect directly to the main office. He'd planned this, all of it. The school administration tried to cover up the extent of the incident at first. Principal Dr. Martinez called it an unfortunate accident involving faulty equipment and suggested that we students might be misremembering details due to trauma. But 17 of us gave consistent statements to the police, and the security footage was damning. You could clearly see Mr. Garrett pouring accelerant on the flames and preventing students from accessing safety equipment. My parents hired a lawyer after the school board suggested I might be partially responsible for encouraging panic by yelling about the chemical storage. They said my alarmist behavior had made the situation worse and contributed to other students' trauma. The local news picked up the story when someone leaked the security footage online. Within 24 hours, it had been shared thousands of times with captions like, "Psycho teacher tries to murder students," and "Substitute from hell." The video showed everything. Mr. Garrett deliberately pouring alcohol on the flames, blocking students from reaching safety equipment, refusing to unlock the door even when Sarah was clearly in medical distress. There was no way to spin it as an accident. 3 months later, Mr. Garrett accepted a plea deal and was sentenced to 8 years in state prison. His teaching license was permanently revoked, and he was banned from working with children in any capacity. But the real justice came from the changes that followed. The district implemented mandatory psychological evaluations for all substitute teachers, real-time background check systems, and emergency override procedures for all classroom locks. They also installed direct panic buttons in every classroom that connect to both the fire department and police, bypassing the main office entirely. The school paid for Sarah's medical bills and ongoing therapy, as well as trauma counseling for all of us who were in that room. It wasn't enough, but it was something. I still have nightmares about being trapped in that burning room, watching Mr. Garrett smile while everything went up in flames around us. The smell of smoke still makes me panic, and I can't be in small, windowless rooms without checking for exits. Sarah transferred to a different school district because she couldn't handle being in the same building where it happened. She's doing well now, studying psychology because she wants to understand how people like Mr. Garrett think. Emma became a teacher herself, specializing in emergency preparedness and student safety. Marcus joined the volunteer fire department. Tyler is in law school, planning to specialize in educational negligence cases. We all came away from that day changed, but in different ways. The thing that bothers me most isn't even what Mr. Garrett did to us. It's knowing that he probably still thinks he was doing something valuable, teaching us some important lesson about survival and resilience. But what he actually taught us was that the most dangerous person in the room is often the one who's supposed to be protecting you. Update. A lot of people are asking about the other schools where Mr. Garrett had worked before coming to us. I did some research after the trial, and what I found was honestly terrifying. At Lincoln High School in Ohio, he'd worked as a long-term science substitute for 6 months in 2018. During that time, 3 separate incidents were officially reported. First, he accidentally mixed bleach and ammonia during a chemistry demonstration, creating chlorine gas that sent 4 students to the hospital with respiratory problems. He claimed it was an honest mistake, but security footage showed him reading the warning labels on both bottles before mixing them. Second, he'd locked students in the supply closet as punishment for talking during class. When questioned by administrators, he called it a sensory deprivation learning experience, designed to help them focus their minds through isolation. 3 different students reported being locked in that closet for over an hour at a time. Third, he was caught after hours filming students during lab work with a personal camera, claiming it was for educational documentation. When asked to turn over the footage, he said his camera had been stolen from his car. Despite these incidents, Lincoln High simply chose not to renew his contract rather than firing him outright. They gave him a neutral reference that mentioned his hands-on teaching approach, but didn't include any of the problematic details. From there, he moved to Roosevelt Middle School in Michigan, where he lasted exactly 2 months before being removed from the classroom. During a physics lesson about electrical conductivity, he had students touch a car battery with wet hands while standing in small puddles of water he'd poured on the floor. 2 kids got electrical burns, and 1 was knocked unconscious. He told a student with epilepsy that seizures were just mental weakness and physically prevented her from leaving the classroom when she felt one coming on. She had a seizure at her desk while he continued teaching, claiming it was attention-seeking behavior. Most disturbing of all, custodial staff found him in the building after hours on multiple occasions, going through student files in the main office and taking photographs of personal information with his phone. When confronted about these incidents, he said he was conducting independent research on adolescent stress responses and accused the administration of being overly protective of underperforming students. Roosevelt Middle School did file a formal complaint with the state education department, but somehow that paperwork got lost in the system and never reached our district in Colorado. Then he came to us, hired based on forged references and a background check system that apparently couldn't connect incidents across state lines. What's most frightening is realizing how deliberate and calculated his behavior had been all along. This wasn't someone who gradually lost control or had a mental breakdown in our classroom. This was someone who had been systematically targeting students for years, using his authority as an educator to hurt kids and then moving on when things got too hot. During his trial, the prosecutor presented evidence that Mr. Garrett had been keeping detailed journals about his teaching experiments going back over 5 years. He'd rated students based on their fear responses and documented which types of stress applications were most effective at breaking down what he called modern adolescent complacency. He genuinely believed he was performing some kind of valuable service, toughening up soft kids through calculated trauma. The scariest part is knowing that if Jake hadn't gotten that window open, if Tyler hadn't grabbed that fire extinguisher, if we hadn't worked together to get Sarah out when we did, some of us might not have survived his lesson. Update 2. Someone managed to find Mr. Garrett's old blog before it was taken down by the FBI. The prosecutor used excerpts from it as evidence during the sentencing phase of his trial. With his permission, I'm sharing a few of the more disturbing posts, obviously with his real name removed. Entry from March 15, 2019. These kids today are fundamentally broken. Cushioned by helicopter parents, protected by excessive safety regulations, coddled by a society that treats every minor discomfort as trauma. They need real adversity to build character, real danger to teach them respect. Fire is the ultimate teacher. It demands immediate attention and punishes weakness instantly. Entry from August 3rd, 2019. Had an interesting opportunity today to observe genuine fear responses in my students. The alarm malfunctioned during a routine demonstration, and several subjects showed promising stress reactions. Note for future: controlled crisis scenarios provide excellent data on individual resilience thresholds. Entry from November 12, 2019. The educational system coddles students with so-called disabilities and medical conditions. Asthma, anxiety, ADHD, all symptoms of a generation that's never been properly challenged. In my grandfather's day, you either adapted or failed. Natural selection. These kids need exposure therapy on a massive scale. Entry from January 7th, 2020. I've been experimenting with stress-based learning techniques across multiple environments. Fear focuses the mind like nothing else. When students believe they're in genuine danger, they finally stop their constant complaining and pay attention. The trick is maintaining plausible deniability while creating authentic crisis conditions. Reading those entries made my skin crawl. He'd been planning to hurt students for years, carefully developing his methods and justifying his actions with pseudo-educational theories. What's even more disturbing is that he'd been studying our reactions, taking notes on which kids were most susceptible to fear-based manipulation. He'd identified Sarah's asthma as a potential teaching tool weeks before the fire incident. The FBI investigation revealed that he'd been in contact with other people online who shared his twisted views about toughening up modern kids through trauma. There was apparently a whole network of former educators who believed that deliberate psychological and physical stress was necessary to combat what they saw as generational weakness. Some of these people were still working in schools. That realization has honestly been almost as traumatic as the original incident. Knowing that there are other Mr. Garretts out there, people who see teaching as an opportunity to inflict pain on children for their own warped sense of the greater good. Update 3. Sarah asked me to add her perspective on what happened that day and what the aftermath has been like for her. The hardest part about the whole experience wasn't just the fire or nearly dying from an asthma attack. It was how Mr. Garrett looked at me while I was struggling to breathe. Like I was a lab rat in one of his experiments. Like my suffering was data he was collecting. I've been in therapy for 3 years now, and my therapist says what he did constitutes a form of torture. He deliberately created conditions that would trigger my medical condition, then prevented me from getting help while studying my distress. The worst part is knowing that he enjoyed watching me suffer. You could see it in his face. This cold, clinical satisfaction when I started having trouble breathing, like he was proud of himself for creating such an effective learning scenario. I still can't smell smoke without having panic attacks. I've had to change career plans twice because my original goal was pre-med, but I can't handle being around medical equipment that beeps or hisses. The sound of oxygen tanks or ventilators sends me into full anxiety spirals. I switched to psychology because I became obsessed with understanding how someone can look at a child who's literally dying and see it as educational entertainment. My therapist says some people have something fundamentally wrong with their capacity for empathy. They can observe suffering without feeling compelled to stop it. In fact, some of them are drawn to situations where they can cause or observe pain because it makes them feel powerful. Mr. Garrett was one of those people, and the teaching profession gave him perfect access to vulnerable targets who couldn't easily fight back or escape. What scares me is that there are probably others like him still out there in classrooms, looking for opportunities to hurt kids while hiding behind educational authority. I want other students to know that if an adult in your school is making you uncomfortable or putting you in situations that feel dangerous, trust your instincts. Don't assume they know what they're doing just because they're teachers. Mr. Garrett counted on us being too respectful of adult authority to question his methods, even when those methods were obviously harmful. But respect has to be earned, and authority without accountability is just abuse. If I hadn't been rescued when I would have died in that classroom while my teacher watched and took notes. Update 4. For everyone asking about how the school administration handled the aftermath, here's what actually happened. Initially, the school tried to contain the damage through what they called crisis management. Principal Dr. Martinez held a meeting with all the parents the day after the incident, where he described it as a regrettable accident involving equipment malfunction and poor emergency protocols. He suggested that we students were traumatized and possibly misremembering details about Mr. Garrett's behavior, and that the investigation would need to sort out fact from adolescent perception. That lasted exactly until the security footage leaked online. Once the video went viral showing Mr. Garrett clearly and deliberately pouring accelerant on the flames, locking the door and blocking access to safety equipment, the administration's story fell apart completely. Dr. Martinez was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The school board held an emergency session where they voted to terminate his contract after parents presented not just the security footage, but also documentation of previous complaints about substitute teacher screening that had been ignored. The district superintendent, Janet Walsh, initially tried to distance herself from the hiring decision by blaming clerical errors in the background check process. But local investigative reporters discovered that she had personally signed off on Mr. Garrett's hiring, despite multiple red flags in his file. Turns out the clerical errors were actually a deliberate decision to hire him quickly because they were desperate for science substitutes, even though his references couldn't be verified and there were gaps in his employment history. Walsh resigned under pressure after the school board voted no confidence in her leadership. 3 school board members were recalled in a special election organized by parents around the campaign slogan, "Our kids deserve better." The new board immediately implemented a zero-tolerance policy for substitute teacher misconduct and created anonymous reporting systems for students. They also hired an independent safety consultant who found dozens of code violations and emergency protocol failures throughout the district. Apparently, our classroom wasn't the only one with disabled smoke detectors and non-functional emergency systems. The most significant change was the installation of panic buttons in every classroom that connect directly to emergency services, bypassing the main office entirely. Students can also text a special number that immediately alerts police and fire departments if they're in danger but can't reach a panic button. They created a student safety council with real authority to investigate complaints and recommend disciplinary action. For the first time, students have an official voice in decisions about adult behavior that affects our safety. Update 5. I'm now in my junior year at Colorado State University, studying emergency management and educational safety policy. What happened in that chemistry classroom completely changed the trajectory of my life. My focus area is developing better screening and monitoring systems for substitute teachers, as well as emergency response protocols specifically designed for school crisis situations. During my research, I've learned that incidents like ours are far more common than most people realize. According to the Department of Education, there are approximately 150 to 200 cases per year where substitute teachers are formally disciplined for endangering students. But experts believe the actual number is much higher because many incidents go unreported. The problem is systemic. School districts nationwide are facing severe substitute teacher shortages, which creates pressure to hire quickly with minimal vetting. Many substitutes work across multiple districts, making it easy for problem individuals to move around when their behavior becomes an issue. There's also a culture in education that assumes adults in authority positions have students' best interests at heart, which makes it difficult for kids to report concerning behavior and be believed. My senior thesis is focused on developing a national database that would track problematic behaviors across state lines and create red flags for districts considering hiring substitutes with concerning histories. I've testified before the state legislature twice about the need for stronger substitute teacher screening laws, and I'm working with several advocacy groups to push for federal legislation requiring psychological evaluations for all educators working with minors. Mr. Garrett is eligible for parole review next year. The prosecutor's office has assured us that they'll oppose early release, and several of us are planning to give victim impact statements at the hearing. But honestly, even if he stays in prison for his full sentence, there are others like him already in classrooms across the country. People who view their authority over students as an opportunity to cause harm rather than provide education. That's why I'm dedicating my career to identifying and stopping them before they can hurt anyone else. The system failed us once. I'm determined to help build a better system that actually protects kids instead of just assuming they're safe because they're in school. Update 6. This post has gotten more attention than I ever expected, and I've received hundreds of messages from people sharing their own experiences with dangerous teachers and school administrators who failed to protect them. Reading these stories has been both heartening and heartbreaking. Heartening because it means we're not alone in what we experienced, but heartbreaking because it's clear that what happened to us wasn't an isolated incident. A few themes keep coming up in the messages I've received. First, many people have stories about teachers who use their authority to humiliate, frighten, or physically endanger students under the guise of tough love or character building. These adults genuinely believe that causing distress was somehow beneficial for their victims. Second, school administrators often prioritize protecting the institution's reputation over investigating complaints about staff behavior. Multiple people have told me about being discouraged from reporting incidents or being told they were overreacting to clearly inappropriate conduct. Third, the most dangerous educators are often the ones who are most skilled at manipulation and maintaining plausible deniability. They know exactly how far they can push without leaving obvious evidence, and they're experts at making their victims feel like they won't be believed if they speak up. If you're a student reading this and an adult in your school is making you uncomfortable or putting you in situations that feel wrong, please tell someone you trust. Tell your parents. Tell another teacher you feel safe with. Tell a counselor. Call a crisis hotline if necessary. Don't assume that person knows what they're doing just because they're in a position of authority. Trust your instincts about when something isn't right. Mr. Garrett counted on us being too polite, too respectful of adult authority, and too afraid of getting in trouble to question his methods. He used our socialization to obey teachers against us. But blind obedience to authority is exactly what allows people like him to hurt children. Sometimes the most important lesson you can learn is when not to do what an adult tells you to do. 3 years later, all of us who survived that classroom are doing well in our own ways. Sarah is thriving in her psychology program and plans to specialize in trauma therapy for children. Emma is student teaching and will graduate next month with her education degree. She wants to be the kind of teacher who actually listens when kids say something's wrong. Marcus became a volunteer firefighter and EMT while studying business. He says our experience taught him the importance of helping people in crisis situations. Tyler is in his final year of law school, planning to specialize in educational negligence and civil rights cases. Jake transferred to a school with a better science program and is now studying chemical engineering. He says he wants to understand fire safety systems well enough to make sure what happened to us never happens to anyone else. We all took something different from that horrible day, but we all came out stronger and more determined to prevent similar tragedies. Mr. Garrett thought he was teaching us about survival and resilience through trauma. What he actually taught us was that sometimes the most important skill you can develop is knowing when the adults who are supposed to protect you are actually the ones you need protection from, and that when the system fails, sometimes young people have to save themselves and each other. Final update. Thank you to everyone who has read this far and taken the time to share their own experiences or offer support. Writing this all out has been therapeutic in ways I didn't expect. If there's one thing I want people to take away from our story, it's this. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, even if the person doing it has authority over you. We live in a society that teaches children to obey adults automatically, but that socialization can be dangerous when those adults have harmful intentions. Question authority when it doesn't make sense. Speak up when you see someone being hurt, even if it's inconvenient or scary. Help each other, because sometimes that's all you have. And if you're an educator reading this, please remember that the children in your classroom trust you with their safety and their lives. That trust is sacred, and violating it for any reason, even if you think you're helping them somehow, is one of the worst betrayals an adult can commit. Mr. Garrett robbed us of our sense of safety in what should have been a protected environment. But he also taught us that we're stronger than we thought, and that we can protect each other even when the adults fail us. That's a lesson I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. Comments have been disabled on this post due to victim blaming and harassment. If you want to share your own experience or offer support, please message me directly.